Ceryna Tval despised humans. It was not a hatred born of ignorance, far from it. She had studied them extensively, understood their psychology, their history of war and conquest, their dangerous tendency towards self-righteousness. But what irritated her most was their arrogance, the way they carried themselves as if they alone held the key to galactic diplomacy. And Jason Reid was the living embodiment of that arrogance. As the lead envoy for the Terran Republic, Jason had a reputation that preceded him: brilliant, charismatic, and infuriatingly smug. He had a way of talking that made even the most seasoned negotiators want to strangle him. But worse, he had a track record of success that proved his methods worked. That, above all, made Ceryna loathe him. Ceryna, as the chief diplomat of the Kelisari Dominion, was tasked with brokering peace between her people and the Terrans. The war between their species had raged for 5 long years, brutal, costly, and ultimately pointless. Now, both sides stood at the precipice of an uneasy peace, and it was her responsibility to ensure that the fragile treaty held. Yet sitting across the negotiation table from Jason Reid made that task feel impossible. The Terran envoy leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk playing at his lips. "You know, Ambassador, for a species that prides itself on logic, the Kelisari have a funny way of dragging out the inevitable. We both know this war benefits no one. Why the delay?" Ceryna narrowed her golden eyes, her scaled brow furrowing. "Perhaps because we do not rush into decisions based on gut instinct and bravado." Jason chuckled. "Oh, come on. That's a diplomatic way of saying humans are reckless idiots. Just say it, Ambassador." She let out a sharp breath. "I would never be so unprofessional, but you'd think it." Damn him. Before she could formulate a reply, a soft chime echoed through the chamber. The High Council of Kelisari had summoned her. Rising swiftly, she inclined her head. "We will continue this discussion later, Envoy Reid. Try not to start a war while I'm gone." Jason grinned. "No promises." As she turned on her heel and strode away, she felt his gaze lingering on her. The Kelisari High Council's chamber was an imposing structure, carved from polished obsidian, its walls etched with the names of generations past. The air carried the weight of history, of decisions that had shaped the fate of a people spanning 1,000 worlds. Ceryna knelt before the assembled counselors, the towering figures draped in ceremonial robes of deep blue and silver. Their expressions were unreadable. Ambassador Tval, the central figure, High Chancellor Relix, spoke. "We have reviewed the latest developments in the peace talks. Your efforts have been noted." She lifted her chin. "Thank you, Chancellor. Progress is slow, but we are approaching a resolution." A murmur ran through the council, a whisper of something she could not quite place. It was Councillor Varen who leaned forward next, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "And yet, progress is not what we require, Ambassador. Certainty is. You are aware that some among us question the wisdom of negotiating with the humans at all?" She clenched her jaw. "I am aware." "And do you, in your esteemed judgment, believe that a treaty with the Terrans is truly in the best interest of our dominion?" Something in his tone made her uneasy. She chose her words carefully. "I believe peace is in the best interest of all our people. The war has drained our resources. We have lost millions. The humans have lost millions. We must find a way forward." A silence stretched across the chamber. Then, Relix spoke again. "We agree." She exhaled, relief washing over her, until he continued. "Which is why the council has made a decision. The peace talks will end." Ceryna's breath hitched. "What?" "The war will end on our terms. We will strike before the Terrans suspect treachery. Their envoy, Jason Reid, is to be eliminated. Their fleet will be crippled in a surprise offensive. Victory will be ours." Ceryna's blood ran cold. This was treason against their own principles, against every diplomatic effort she had spent years fighting for. This was not peace, it was slaughter. For the first time in her life, she felt fear. Not for herself, but for the arrogant, insufferable human who had become an unwitting pawn in a game far larger than either of them. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had to warn him. The halls of the Kelisari complex seemed darker, more oppressive, as Ceryna moved through them with calculated urgency. She was not a soldier. She had no weapons, no formal combat training, but what she did have was knowledge. She knew the security codes, the hidden passages diplomats used in times of crisis, and she knew that if she hesitated, Jason Reid would be dead within the hour. By the time she reached the guest quarters assigned to the Terran delegation, she could already sense the shift in the air. Guards stationed at unusual positions, the subtle movements of assassins in the shadows. The attack was imminent. She didn't knock. She stormed inside, sealing the door behind her. Jason was sitting at a desk, analyzing data on a holoscreen, feet propped up casually. He barely looked up. Ambassador Tval, to what do I owe the pleasure? Get up, she hissed. He frowned. Excuse me? We need to leave. Now. Jason sat up, the amusement in his eyes giving way to something sharper. What's going on? She hesitated for only a fraction of a second, long enough to know that the truth was her only option. Your life is in danger. My people are planning to assassinate you. Jason stared at her for a long moment. Then, with an exhale, he muttered, well, that's a hell of a way to break the ice. A sharp bang echoed from outside. Someone trying to override the security lock. Ceryna's pulse spiked. Move, she ordered. To her surprise, Jason didn't argue. He was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his datapad and sidearm in one swift motion. He gave her a lopsided grin. Lead the way, Ambassador. And together, they ran. The corridor outside Jason's quarters was no longer safe. Ceryna knew that the Kelisari agents, assassins trained in stealth and precision, would be closing in within moments. The override sequence on the door was already halfway complete, a matter of seconds before it slid open and sealed their fate. Ceryna didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jason's wrist, her claws pressing into his skin as she pulled him toward the emergency access hatch at the far end of the room. Help me with this, she said, gesturing toward the metal panel embedded into the floor. Jason crouched down, fingers finding the hidden seams. With a grunt, he pried the hatch open, revealing a dark ventilation shaft beneath. Seriously, he muttered, crawling through vents? You're really leaning into the whole spy thriller aesthetic, aren't you? Unless you have a better idea, she shot back. Fair point. Without further argument, Jason slipped inside, followed closely by Ceryna. The moment her feet left the floor, the door to his quarters hissed open behind them. A cold voice rang out. Kill the human. Bring the traitor alive. The ventilation shaft was narrow, forcing them to move on hands and knees. It was not built for comfort, only function. A faint blue glow emanated from the walls, the emergency lighting casting eerie shadows on their faces. Jason crawled ahead, his breathing steady despite the danger. So, he whispered, why exactly are your people trying to kill me? I thought we were making progress. Some of them believe peace is a weakness, she replied, keeping her voice low. They want victory, not compromise. You are the first step in their plan. Without you, the negotiations collapse, and war continues under their terms. Jason exhaled sharply. Well, that's just fantastic. A sudden noise from behind sent ice through Ceryna's veins. A metallic clank, a hiss of displaced air. They weren't alone. She turned, just in time to see a figure moving through the shaft behind them. Fast, silent, lethal. A Kelisari assassin, clad in the black armor of the Dominion's covert operatives. Her mind calculated the odds in an instant. The shaft was too narrow for a fight. They had no weapons beyond Jason's sidearm, and firing inside the enclosed space would be disastrous. They had one option, run. Move, she hissed. Jason didn't need to be told twice. He surged forward, crawling faster, his muscles straining against the confined space. Ceryna followed, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The assassin was gaining. Then, Jason spotted something up ahead, a vertical shaft, leading downward. He gritted his teeth. How far down does this go? At least 4 stories, Ceryna answered. Jason grimaced. And what's at the bottom? She hesitated. A coolant reservoir. Is it lethal? Only if you breathe it in. Great. Better than getting stabbed, I guess. Without another word, Jason twisted his body and dropped. Ceryna sucked in a breath. Madness. He was utterly mad. But there was no time for hesitation. She threw herself after him. The fall lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. The air howled around them as they plunged downward. Ceryna caught a brief glimpse of Jason twisting midair, angling his body for impact. Then, they hit the coolant reservoir with a bone-jarring splash. The liquid was thick, cloying, almost gelatinous. Ceryna fought the instinct to inhale, forcing her body to kick upward toward the surface. Jason was already ahead of her, breaking through with a gasping breath. She followed, sputtering. The coolant stung her eyes, but she blinked it away, scanning their surroundings. They had landed in a vast industrial chamber, dimly lit by overhead fixtures. Enormous coolant pipes ran along the walls, humming with energy. Jason shook the liquid from his hair. Okay, that was new. Ceryna didn't answer. Her senses were on high alert. The assassin wouldn't be far behind. And as if to confirm her fears, a figure landed in the coolant with barely a ripple. The Kelisari operative rose smoothly, water streaming off their black armor. Their twin daggers gleamed under the cold light. Jason cursed. You've got to be kidding me. Ceryna's claws flexed. They had nowhere left to run. They would have to fight. The Kelisari assassin advanced, twin daggers glinting under the dim industrial lights. Every movement was precise, calculated, a predator closing in on cornered prey. Ceryna knew what they were dealing with. Elite Dominion Shadow operatives were not just skilled killers. They were trained from birth, conditioned for perfection. The only thing more terrifying than facing one in combat was facing one unarmed. Jason slowly reached for his sidearm, but the assassin was faster. In a blur of motion, they flicked their wrist, and a serrated throwing blade whistled through the air. Jason barely managed to twist aside, the blade slicing through the soaked fabric of his sleeve before embedding itself in a coolant pipe behind him with a thunk. Shit, he muttered. Okay, so they're fast. Ceryna didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, water sloshing around her knees as she aimed a precise strike at the assassin's throat. It was a bold move, but she wasn't a soldier, just a diplomat trained in basic self-defense. The assassin caught her wrist mid-strike, twisted sharply, and sent her sprawling into the coolant with brutal efficiency. Jason reacted instantly. He brought his pistol up and fired. Once, twice, quick, controlled shots. But the assassin was already moving, weaving like liquid shadow. One shot barely grazed their shoulder. The other went wide. Before Jason could adjust his aim, the assassin closed the distance, slashing downward with an electrified dagger. Jason barely managed to block with his forearm, his exosuit taking the brunt of the impact, but the shockwave still jolted through his body. Not a fan of fair fights, huh? Jason gritted out, stumbling backward. The assassin said nothing. They didn't need to. Ceryna surged back to her feet, coolant dripping from her scales. Reid. This way. Jason didn't argue. He fired another shot to keep the assassin at bay and bolted after her. Ceryna led him toward a maintenance door at the far end of the chamber. She punched in an override code on the control panel, but the system blinked red, locked. Come on, she hissed. Jason turned, just in time to see the assassin closing in again. Move, he shouted. Ceryna abandoned the keypad and did the only thing she could think of. She drove her clawed fingers into the panel and ripped it open, exposing the inner circuitry. Sparks flew as she tore out a handful of wires, triggering a failsafe override. The door hissed open. Go, she ordered. Jason dove through first. Ceryna followed, slamming her hand against the emergency lock. The door sealed shut just as the assassin lunged. A solid thud reverberated through the metal as their pursuer struck the sealed barrier. Jason let out a breath. Well, that was fun. Ceryna shot him a sharp look. We are not safe yet. Jason straightened, shaking the coolant from his arms. Yeah, I figured. So what's the plan now, Ambassador? Ceryna turned, scanning their new surroundings. They had entered an emergency service tunnel, narrow, dimly lit, but leading deeper into the Kelisari complex. The spaceport, she said. We need to get off-world. Jason arched a brow. Oh, So we're officially fugitives now? Fantastic. Ceryna's expression was grim. If we stay, we die. Jason sighed. All right then. Let's go steal a ship. The emergency tunnel led them through the lower levels of the Kelisari diplomatic complex. Every step they took was a step deeper into treason. Ceryna had spent her life serving the Dominion, believing in the ideals of diplomacy and reason. But now, she was running from her own people, branded a traitor for daring to pursue peace. Jason, for his part, moved with the confidence of a man who had been in situations like this before. Ceryna envied his ability to adapt, to take things in stride. So, he said, keeping his voice low as they navigated the tunnel, this coup of yours, how deep does it run? Ceryna's jaw tightened. If the High Council is involved, it's not a coup. It's a regime shift. Jason whistled. That bad, huh? She exhaled sharply. Worse. They reached an access hatch leading to the city outskirts. Ceryna pressed her palm against the scanner. It blinked red, rejecting her credentials. Locked out, she murmured. They've already revoked my clearance. Jason smirked. Good thing I don't bother with clearance. Before she could question him, he knelt beside the hatch, pulled a small device from his belt, and pressed it against the scanner. A few rapid beeps, and the lock disengaged. Ceryna gave him a look. That was suspiciously efficient. Jason grinned. I travel prepared. The hatch slid open, revealing the sprawling industrial outskirts of the Kelisari capital. The city's towering spires loomed in the distance, but the spaceport wasn't far. If they could reach it before the Dominion forces locked it down, they had a chance. But as they stepped into the open, a voice echoed from the darkness. Going somewhere, Ambassador? Ceryna froze. From the shadows, a group of Kelisari soldiers emerged, weapons trained on them. And at the center of them stood a figure she knew all too well, Counselor Varen. Jason exhaled. This guy again. Varen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You disappoint me, Tval. I expected better. Ceryna's hands curled into fists. You are betraying everything the Dominion stands for. Varen tilted his head. No, Ambassador. I am ensuring its survival. Jason sighed. You politicians and your vague threats. Mind skipping ahead to the part where you tell us your evil plan? Varen ignored him, eyes locked on Ceryna. The humans are weak. They are a disease upon the stars, spreading their influence where it does not belong. This peace you cling to is an illusion. But do not worry, Ambassador. You will live long enough to see the Dominion rise. He nodded toward his soldiers. Take them. The soldiers moved forward. Jason, without hesitation, muttered, I really hope you have a backup plan. Ceryna had only one thought. Ceryna's mind raced. There was no reasoning with Varen. He was too deep into his own delusion, too committed to the Dominion's so-called rise. The soldiers around him were well-armed, well-trained, and fully prepared to kill Jason on command. She needed an opening, a distraction, anything. Jason, meanwhile, exhaled sharply. All right, let's think this through. He glanced at Ceryna. You got some kind of talk-them-down diplomatic trick up your sleeve? Varen smirked. It's far too late for diplomacy, Terran. Jason nodded. Cool. Just checking. Then, without warning, he threw his sidearm at the nearest soldier's face. The unexpected move startled the Kelisari, and in that split second, Jason lunged. He tackled one of the soldiers, ripping the rifle from their hands before spinning and slamming the butt of the weapon into another guard's ribs. Ceryna didn't waste the opportunity. She darted forward, using her claws to slash the weapon cables of another soldier before driving her elbow into their throat. The guard stumbled back, choking. Varen snarled, Kill the human. Gunfire erupted. Jason yanked Ceryna behind cover, a large transport crate near the industrial walkway. Pulse rounds scorched the air where they had just been standing. Ceryna's breath came fast. That was reckless. Jason grinned, shoving a fresh power cell into his stolen rifle. Yeah, but it was fun. She shot him a glare, but he just winked. A pulse grenade rolled toward them. Ceryna's eyes widened. Move. They dived in opposite directions as the explosion sent a shockwave rippling through the air. Jason hit the ground hard, rolling to his feet just in time to take down another soldier with a precise shot. Ceryna landed near one of the fallen guards and grabbed their weapon, spinning just in time to see Varen drawing a sleek, black energy pistol. She fired first. The shot struck Varen's wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon. He snarled in pain, clutching his arm. "Enough!" he shouted. "You cannot escape, Tval. You have nowhere left to run." Ceryna knew he was right. Even if they fought their way through this squad, reinforcements would be closing in. Unless... Her gaze flickered toward the spaceport. A distant docking bay flashed red, security lockdown protocols in effect. No ships would be leaving. Unless they stole one. She turned to Jason. "We need a ship." Jason smirked. "Now you're talking." The firefight erupted anew as they sprinted toward the spaceport's outer gates. Automated defenses were already powering up, sentry drones hovering above like vultures awaiting a kill. Ceryna swore under her breath. "They're locking down everything." Jason glanced at the docking bay list on his wrist console. "Okay, we need something fast. Something with..." He stopped mid-sentence. His face lit up. Ceryna didn't like that look. "What?" Jason pointed to a ship manifest. "That?" She followed his gaze. Her blood ran cold. "You want to steal a military corvette?" she hissed. Jason grinned. "Correction. We want to steal a military corvette." The ship in question, the Vindicator, was a Dominion warship, heavily armed, designed for rapid assaults. Taking it wouldn't just be difficult. It would be insane. Jason clapped her on the shoulder. "Come on, Ambassador. Live a little." Before she could argue, alarms blared across the port. They had been spotted. Ceryna exhaled. "Fine. Let's commit high treason." They ran. Behind them, Varen's forces pursued, weapons blazing. Security drones swarmed from above, firing pulse bolts that exploded against the pavement in bursts of blue fire. Jason ducked, grabbed a discarded grenade from a fallen soldier, and tossed it over his shoulder. It detonated mid-air, scattering the drones in a shower of sparks. They reached the Corvette's access ramp, but it was still locked. Ceryna's fingers flew across the control panel, inputting an override sequence. The screen flashed denied. Jason groaned. "Please tell me you have a backup plan." Ceryna's eyes flicked to the ship's identification scanner. Biometric access required. She turned to the nearest down Dominion officer, grabbed their wrist, and pressed their palm against the scanner. The system beeped. The access ramp hissed open. Jason whistled. "Remind me not to piss you off." They sprinted inside, sealing the hatch just as Varen's forces reached the platform. Ceryna didn't stop moving. "You fly. I'll get weapons online." Jason vaulted over the pilot's seat, fingers dancing across the controls. The ship's engines roared to life. Outside, Dominion gunships were already scrambling. Jason grinned. "All right, let's see if this thing can dance." The Vindicator lifted off. The chase was on. The Vindicator surged into the sky, its powerful engines leaving a rippling wake of blue ion trails as it tore through the atmosphere. Jason's hands moved fluidly over the controls, adjusting thrusters and stabilizers with practiced ease. The ship was heavier than he liked, but it had raw power. Power they would need if they had any hope of escaping the Dominion's grasp. Ceryna strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat, fingers racing over the weapons console. Multiple pursuit craft inbound. 3 Dominion interceptors on fast approach. Jason exhaled. "Of course there are." The comm crackled to life. "Vindicator, you are in unauthorized possession of a Dominion warship. Power down immediately, or we will open fire." Ceryna scoffed. "They're going to fire either way." Jason flashed a grin. "Exactly." He flipped a switch. "Strap in, Ambassador. We're gonna make him work for it." The interceptors opened fire. Bolts of white-hot plasma streaked toward them, cutting through the upper atmosphere with terrifying precision. Jason pulled the ship into a steep dive, banking hard to the left, sending one of the incoming shots narrowly past their hull. Ceryna's claws dug into the seat. "You call that flying?" Jason smirked. "I call it not getting hit." The Vindicator rocketed through the stratosphere, pushing the limits of its atmospheric capabilities. The Dominion fighters stayed close, their pilots relentless. Ceryna's screen flared red. Lock-on warning. Missile incoming. Jason yanked the controls, sending the ship into a brutal corkscrew maneuver. The missile adjusted course, tailing them in an unrelenting pursuit. Flares. Jason barked. Ceryna slammed the countermeasures button. A spread of glowing decoys launched from the ship's rear. The missile veered off course, then corrected, adapting to the deception. Jason cursed. Smart munitions. Wonderful. Ceryna's mind raced. The coolant vents, can you force them open? Jason blinked. What? Dump the reactor coolant. Now. Jason hesitated for only a fraction of a second before hitting the override. The ship vented, releasing a sudden burst of freezing vapor. The missile, unable to compensate for the sudden temperature shift, detonated prematurely, the shock wave buffeting the Vindicator, but sparing them from destruction. Jason let out a breath. Okay, I'll admit that was clever. Ceryna smirked. You're welcome. But there was no time to celebrate. The Dominion fighters were still in pursuit. Ceryna's hands flew over the weapon systems, bringing cannons online, giving you dorsal and ventral firing arcs. Jason grinned. Now that's what I like to hear. A targeting reticle appeared on his HUD. He twisted the ship, lining up the first interceptor. His fingers squeezed the trigger. The Vindicator's cannons roared to life. A barrage of plasma rounds erupted from the hull, tearing through the lead interceptor's cockpit. The ship spiraled out of control before erupting into a ball of fire. Jason whooped. One down. The remaining two fighters veered, adapting to their movements. One broke off to strafe them from the side, while the other climbed for a high-angle attack. Ceryna narrowed her eyes. They're boxing us in. Jason clicked his tongue. Then we break the box. He slammed the throttle forward, sending the Vindicator into an unexpected vertical ascent. The sudden shift threw off the high-flying interceptor's targeting solution. Jason flipped the ship's nose down and fired. The plasma round struck true. The second Dominion fighter erupted into debris. The last interceptor banked hard, clearly reconsidering its odds. Jason grinned. Smart move, buddy. But before it could flee, a new signal blared on the sensors. Ceryna's eyes widened. Jump signatures, 3 new ships incoming. Jason cursed. Reinforcements? A second later, the answer became painfully clear. 3 Dominion battlecruisers tore into real space, their massive forms blotting out the stars. Their weapons immediately began charging. Ceryna's blood ran cold. We cannot fight that. Jason's hands tightened on the controls. Then we don't. The Dominion battlecruisers wasted no time. Heavy plasma turrets rotated toward them, locking on. Jason knew what was coming before Ceryna even said it. They're charging their main cannons, she murmured. If they fire, we won't even leave debris behind. Jason exhaled sharply. We need to jump now. Ceryna's talons flew across the navigation controls. I can't. There are too many gravitational locks in place. They've anchored us to the system. Jason clenched his jaw. Then we have to break the anchor. Ceryna's golden eyes flicked toward him. You're suggesting we brute force a jump? Jason's lips curled into a lopsided grin. What's life without a little risk? Ceryna was about to protest, about to tell him that forcing a jump without a stable trajectory was suicide, but then she realized something. It was the only option. Fine, she growled, diverting all power to the drive core. Jason cracked his knuckles. Let's piss off some admirals. The Vindicator shuddered as its FTL core powered up. Warning lights flashed across the console. Gravitational tethers still held them in place. Ceryna's hands raced over the terminal. I can override 2 of the locks, but the last one? Leave that to me. Jason yanked the ship's controls into an erratic roll, dodging the first blast from the battlecruisers. The explosion sent shockwaves rippling through space, but he didn't slow down. Reid, if we don't time this perfectly... I know, he said. A second later, the final tether lock disengaged. Jason punched the jump drive. The Vindicator lurched, its engines screaming in protest as they tore through the remaining gravitational forces. The Dominion battlecruisers fired again, 3 beams of raw energy converging toward them. The Vindicator vanished into FTL just before impact. The jump tunnel opened. a swirling vortex of impossible light, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Ceryna thought they had messed up, that they would be ripped apart by unstable forces. But then, the turbulence stopped. The ship stabilized. They were alive. Jason let out a deep breath and leaned back in his seat. Holy shit. Ceryna exhaled, her hands still clenched around the console. I cannot believe that worked. Jason shot her a grin. Never doubt me, Ambassador. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Then, her expression darkened. We escaped, but we're not safe. Varen and the Dominion will hunt us across the stars. Jason's smirk faded. Yeah, I figured. A heavy silence settled between them. Ceryna finally looked at him. So what now, human? Jason grinned. Now? We find out just how deep this conspiracy goes. And with that, the Vindicator hurtled into the unknown. The Vindicator hurtled through FTL space, its engines humming with barely contained energy. Inside the cockpit, Jason exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. Ceryna sat beside him, her golden eyes fixed on the navigation console. They had made it out, barely. But the reality of their situation was beginning to settle in. They were fugitives. Jason glanced at her. So, where exactly are we jumping to? Ceryna's fingers hovered over the NAV controls. I don't know. Jason blinked. Excuse me? She gestured to the display. We forced the jump without a locked trajectory. The system compensated by calculating the nearest unoccupied sector with stable exit conditions. Jason's expression darkened. Meaning? Ceryna's voice was quiet. We could be anywhere. The words settled between them like a weight. Jason leaned forward, studying the star charts. The screen flickered, data recalibrating as the ship's sensors adjusted to their new position. Then, finally, a system name appeared. Zaltris, 7. Jason frowned. Never heard of it. Ceryna's scales rippled in a slow, uneasy pattern. It's an abandoned sector. Once a thriving trade route, but the entire system was mysteriously abandoned over a decade ago. Jason's brow furrowed. Mysteriously? Ceryna nodded. No distress calls. No records of battle. Just silence. Jason leaned back. Great. So we're stranded in some creepy ghost system with no backup, no allies, and an entire empire trying to kill us. Ceryna's lips pressed into a thin line. That about sums it up. Jason sighed. You really know how to pick him, Ambassador. The Vindicator dropped out of FTL with a shudder, the swirling vortex of hyperspace giving way to the vast, empty expanse of Zaltris, 7. The system was dead. A lone, pale star hung in the void, its light weak and sickly. A belt of shattered asteroids drifted lazily, remnants of what might have once been a thriving orbital network. But something else caught their attention. A signal. It was faint, barely detectable beneath the static of deep space radiation. But it was there. Jason leaned forward. Someone's broadcasting. Ceryna tapped a few commands. Encrypted. Old Dominion coding, but modified. Someone doesn't want this to be found. Jason grinned. Well, now I have to know. Ceryna hesitated. It could be a trap. Jason winked. It definitely could be a trap. Ceryna exhaled sharply. You are impossible. Jason smirked. And yet, here we are. Ceryna sent a reply ping to the signal. A few moments passed in silence. Then, the console lit up. A voice crackled through the comms. Unknown vessel. You have access to restricted channel. Identify yourself. Jason and Ceryna exchanged a glance. Then Jason grinned and keyed the mic. Hey there. We're just a couple of friendly fugitives looking for a warm welcome. Got room for two. The silence that followed was long and deliberate. Then, the voice returned. Docking coordinates incoming. Do not deviate from the approach vector. Jason arched a brow. Well, that was easy. Ceryna's scales darkened. Or we just walked into something worse. Jason fired the thrusters. Only one way to find out. The Vindicator turned, heading toward the unknown. The Vindicator followed the designated flight path, weaving through the silent remains of a shattered orbital network. Wreckage drifted aimlessly. Old cargo hulls, crumbling space stations, debris stripped of anything valuable. This place had been abandoned for a reason. And yet, the signal was leading them somewhere. Jason adjusted their heading as a structure emerged from the darkness. It was a station, a massive, looming behemoth of Kelisari and Terran hybrid design, its surface pockmarked with old battle scars. Unlike the rest of the system, it had power. Dim, flickering lights lined the docking bay, their glow barely enough to illuminate the jagged hull. Ceryna studied the structure warily. This isn't a Dominion station, but it was. Jason glanced at her. You recognize it? She nodded slowly. This was Outpost Theta 9, a black site facility for classified research. It was shut down years ago. No records of why. Jason smirked. Well, that's not suspicious at all. Ceryna's claws tapped the armrest. I don't like this. Jason chuckled. You never like this. She shot him a glare, but he was already guiding the Vindicator into the docking bay. As they entered, the station's automated clamps activated, locking onto their hull with a heavy clang. Jason powered down the engines. The silence was deafening. Then, the airlock panel lit up. The external doors hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond. Jason unbuckled his harness. Well, Ambassador, shall we go make some new friends? Ceryna exhaled sharply. I have a feeling friends is the wrong word. They stepped into the outpost cautiously. The air was stale, recycled for far too long, carrying the faint metallic scent of old machinery. The corridor ahead was lined with flickering screens, most of them inactive. The few that still worked displayed fragments of old data, schematics, surveillance feeds, corrupted logs. Then, footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. Jason and Ceryna tensed, hands hovering near their weapons. A figure emerged from the shadows. A human, tall, lean, dressed in a reinforced exosuit patched with various scavenged components. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp. A plasma rifle rested casually in his hands, though his posture wasn't overtly hostile. Behind him, several others appeared. Humans, Kelisari, and even a few other species Jason didn't immediately recognize. Their gear was mismatched, battle-worn. Survivors. The lead man stopped a few meters away, studying them both. You're not Dominion, he said. His voice was rough, weathered. Jason smirked. Neither are you. The man didn't return the smile. His gaze flicked to Ceryna, Kelisari diplomat, and a Terran operative. He exhaled. Either we just got lucky, or you've led the Dominion straight to us. Ceryna's voice was steady. We are fugitives, running from the same people you are. The man tilted his head slightly. You know who we are, then? Jason shrugged. Not a damn clue. For the first time, the man smirked. Good. That means we're doing something right. He lowered his rifle slightly. Name's Cade Mercer. Welcome to the Black Sun. Cade led them deeper into the station. The further they went, the clearer it became. This place wasn't as abandoned as it looked. Hidden among the ruins were makeshift barracks, weapons caches, even a functioning tactical hub. The Black Sun wasn't just a group of survivors. They were a resistance. Jason folded his arms. So, you guys are hiding out in a dead system, running secret ops against the Dominion? Cade glanced at him. Something like that. Ceryna frowned. What is this place really? Cade stopped in front of a massive reinforced door. He keyed in a sequence, and the locks disengaged. As the doors slid open, Jason and Ceryna stepped inside and stopped cold. The room beyond was a vault, but instead of valuables, it was filled with something far more dangerous. Data. Hundreds of storage drives, secured in reinforced cases. Servers humming with encrypted information. Hollow terminals displaying Dominion intelligence, intercepted transmissions, classified schematics. Jason let out a low whistle. Well, this is interesting. Cade turned to them. This station was abandoned because the Dominion didn't want anyone knowing what was really happening in this war. Ceryna's claws flexed. And what exactly is that? Cade activated one of the terminals. A hologram flared to life, a star map, riddled with red markers. Dominion-controlled systems. But Jason noticed something strange. Some of the markers weren't planets. They were stations, hidden facilities spread throughout Dominion space. Jason frowned. What am I looking at? Cade's expression hardened. The Dominion isn't just fighting this war for control. They're covering something up. He zoomed in on one of the markers. A classified research facility near the galactic core. This war didn't start over resources or politics, Cade said quietly. It started because the Dominion found something. Something they shouldn't have. Ceryna's breath caught. What did they find? Cade's voice was grim. A weapon. Jason exhaled slowly. Of course they did. Ceryna's gaze remained fixed on the map. And you're trying to stop them? Cade nodded. We've been fighting in the shadows, gathering intel, sabotaging their operations. But we need more. We need people who can act. His eyes met theirs. People like you. Jason chuckled. So let me get this straight. You want us, two of the most wanted fugitives in the Dominion, to help take down their secret project? Cade smirked. That about sums it up. Jason turned to Ceryna. Well, Ambassador? Up for a little galactic espionage? Ceryna sighed. Do I have a choice? Jason grinned. Not really. She exhaled sharply. Then let's bring the Dominion to its knees. Cade nodded. Good. Because if we don't stop them soon, there won't be a galaxy left to save. The outpost hummed with quiet urgency. Data scrolled across holographic displays, intercepted transmissions from deep within Dominion space, painting a bleak picture. The conspiracy was larger than any of them had imagined. Covert research stations, secret military operations, entire fleets mobilizing in the shadows. And at the heart of it all, the Dominion's greatest secret, Project Abyss. Jason stood with arms crossed, studying the star map. Let me guess, whatever this Abyss thing is, it's bad news. Cade's expression was grim. Worse than bad. It's a weapon that could end every war the Dominion fights, by making sure they never have to fight again. Ceryna's brow furrowed. Explain. Cade tapped a command into the console. A new hollow image flickered into view. A planet, or at least, what had once been one. Now, it was a barren, cratered husk. No atmosphere. No life. Just silence. This was Tursus IV, Cade said. A colony world, inhabited by over 100 million people. 2 months ago, it was erased. Ceryna's breath caught. What do you mean, erased? Cade's voice was cold. Not bombed. Not invaded. Erased. The entire biosphere collapsed in an instant. Every living thing gone. And this? He gestured to the dead planet. This is all that's left. Jason exhaled. You're saying the Dominion has a planet killer? Cade shook his head. No. Not a weapon that destroys. One that unmakes. A complete biological and atmospheric reset. No radiation. No wreckage. Just nothing. Ceryna's stomach twisted. That shouldn't be possible. Cade met her gaze. But it is. And the Dominion is about to use it again. The room was silent. The weight of the revelation hung between them. Jason finally broke the tension. Okay, how do we stop it? Cade hesitated. We don't even know where the primary weapon is housed. The only solid lead we have is a Dominion command station near the galactic core, Site Theta 12, high-level research facility. If there's any place with answers, it's there. Ceryna frowned. Breaking into a Dominion black site is suicide. Jason smirked. Yeah, but so is not stopping a genocide machine. Cade folded his arms. We can get you in. A stealth infiltration, small team. Get the data, get out. Ceryna's mind raced. And if we do find the weapon's location? Cade's jaw tightened. Then we end it. Jason exhaled. No pressure. The Vindicator dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Dominion's inner territories, its hull masked by stolen clearance codes provided by the Black Sun. Site Theta 12 loomed ahead, a vast orbital complex, drifting in the shadow of a dying red giant. Ceryna's fingers danced over the controls. They're scanning us. Jason didn't flinch. Let them. They think we're just another Dominion vessel. The comm system crackled. Vindicator, you are cleared for docking. Maintain approach vector. Ceryna let out a slow breath. I can't believe that worked. Jason grinned. You gotta have faith. The docking bay swallowed them whole. The Vindicator settled onto the landing pad, its engines hissing as the ship powered down. Jason secured his sidearm. All right. Quick in, quick out. Ceryna nodded. No mistakes. They stepped onto the station, disguises in place. Dominion officers moved through the halls, oblivious to the intruders among them. But Jason had done enough Black Ops work to know a mission never goes as planned. They made it deep into the facility before things went wrong. The intel was correct. Theta 12 was housing Project Abyss's location. But the moment Ceryna accessed the terminal, alarms screamed through the station. Jason's gut tightened. Shit. They knew we were coming. Ceryna yanked the data drive from the console. We have the location. We need to move now. The doors slammed shut. The lights shifted to deep crimson. A voice echoed through the station's speakers. You should not have come here. Jason's stomach turned. He knew that voice. Varen. The Dominion counselor's voice was smooth, confident. I knew you'd run to the Black Sun. I knew you'd find their scraps of information. And I knew, sooner or later, you'd come looking for the truth. Jason and Ceryna pressed their backs to the wall as Dominion troops flooded the halls. You thought you could stop us? Varen chuckled. You don't even understand what you're trying to fight. Ceryna's grip tightened around the data drive. We understand enough. Varen's voice darkened. No, you don't. You see, Ambassador, you're already too late. Jason's blood ran cold. The station's hollow display flickered. A planetary image appeared. A world teeming with life. Jason's eyes widened. That's... Varen's smile was audible. Yes, the Terran colony of New Horizon. 20 million people. Gone in 3 hours. Ceryna's breath hitched. You monsters. Varen sighed. You act like this is tragic. But this is the future. A galaxy cleansed of weakness. The Dominion will not rule by war. We will rule by erasure. Jason's vision went red. Not if we stop you. Varen chuckled. Oh, Jason, you're not stopping anything. The station shook. The floor tilted. Alarms screamed anew. Ceryna's claws dug into the wall. What's happening? Varen's voice was calm. You're standing in the command center of a dying station. Jason's stomach dropped. They're scuttling the base, Ceryna realized. They're going to kill us. Bury the evidence. Jason grabbed her arm. Then we need to go. They ran. Through burning corridors, through collapsing bulkheads. Dominion soldiers abandoned their posts, escaping to their own vessels. The Vindicator was their only chance. They dove into the ship, engines roaring as Jason tore them free from the exploding station. Behind them, Theta 12 detonated. A blinding burst of fire and metal. And with it, the last hope of stopping Project Abyss before it struck again. In the silence that followed, Ceryna sat rigid in her chair, staring at the data drive. Jason gripped the controls, jaw tight. We lost, Ceryna whispered. Jason exhaled. Not yet. She looked at him. He met her gaze. We take this to the Black Sun. We take it to every rebel, every Terran fleet, every Kelisari who refuses to stand by. His fingers clenched. We make them pay. Ceryna inhaled sharply. And then, she nodded. The war had begun. The Vindicator vanished into the stars.